Welcome, everyone, to our last webinar for the second season of this thing. I can hardly believe it went for more than one episode. My name is Aaron Stoller. I am a ecological consultant with a company called Exponent. You can look up everything about Exponent on their website or on my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to reach out, connect with me, and chat with me online. We do this webinar for those of you that have not participated in this webinar before. We do this to encourage and give a little bit of hope, I guess, to job seekers in the fields of ecology and more broadly of pretty much all environmental science. This is kind of a well, it's never a really great time, I think, other than the 1970s and maybe 80s to be an environmental scientist because the job market always kind of sucks. But it's definitely shifting, and it's really helpful, I have found, to talk with people who are either in the thick of it or looking at it through the rear view mirror to kind of give some perspective and some advice and some suggestions to active job seekers, whether they're early in their career or mid-career. I say it's the last episode because we typically treat these seasons of episodes based on when the annual meeting is for the Ecological Society of America. And so the annual meeting is at the end of July. So we're going to take a break to give the ESA administration a chance to catch their breath and handle other matters. And then we'll resume a little bit after that annual meeting. So, with me today, I have two wonderful colleagues, one of which is at my company, Alex Neal, and I'll let her introduce herself. And then we have Rich Pouyat, who is also a wonderful colleague of mine. I've been speaking with him. I know both him and his wife very well. They're very active members of the Ecological Society of America. And I'm so excited to hear more about his story than I already know, maybe some different parts. Just some quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. You will be able to watch it afterwards on ESA's YouTube site. I usually post it as soon as it's available on my LinkedIn feed. There's already links to past recordings on my LinkedIn feed, so just find one of those posts and go to it. Otherwise, I'm sure ESA will send out an advertisement to all registered participants about the link to the recording if you need it. The Q&A is open. You are welcome and encouraged to ask questions that are relevant to you or relevant to maybe others in the audience. Please just keep it respectful, and we will try to answer them in short order. There is a chat as well as a Q&A. If you don't see the Q&A, as I currently don't on my screen, just click on the More button and it should show up. In fact, let me just make sure that that's correct. Yes, that's correct. So you'll click on the More button and the Q&A should show up. If you want to just introduce yourself or add to the conversation, you can do so through the chat. We'll also be posting links to ESA events. We'll also be posting LinkedIn profiles and emails in the chat. So just keep an eye on that if you're interested in connecting with any of us, or if you just want to introduce yourself and maybe communicate with others, you're welcome to do so. So with that, I'll shut up and let our two invitees introduce themselves. So first, let's go to Alex. Alex, if you could just tell us about who you are and the company that you're at. You don't have to go into any details about the company, just where you're landed currently, and we'll get into your past career history and a follow-up question.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Neal. I am also an ecological consultant with Exponent, where Aaron's at. Um, I we provide litigation support for our clients as well as proactive solutions for problems they come to us with. I think that's a nice and tidy way of saying Exponent's mission base. But I'll hand it over to Rich.
Hi, Rich Pouyat, and I'm currently retired, but I'm officially a scientist emeritus with the U.S. Forest Service, at least in the near term. Not sure about the long term. I worked in the U.S. Forest Service for 30 or so years. Currently doing consulting work. And I do that through an LLC that my wife has. She's a career consulting kind of person. And when I do consulting work, I kind of funnel the money through her LLC. Um, and uh, and that's so so that's pretty much it. I guess the next question is education and background. So I'll hold off on that. But basically, my experience is with everything from management to science policy and also to doing science.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so for any of you that are not aware about the USDA, it's currently undergoing some transitions and maybe some growing pains. I'm not sure. In its move,
Shrinking pains,
shrinking
shrinking
pains. Yeah,
pains.
shrinking pains. That's an unfortunate way to say it, but we'll talk about that later. Maybe. So, okay, thank you for those quick introductions. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about your education and career. Let's not talk about the jobs that you're currently in. Um, Clearly, Rich, you've had a much longer career trajectory than Alex, simply due to time and the way time works. But it's still interesting to hear both of your stories about how you started from point A and got to point B. And so, Alex, let's start with you. Really, can you just talk about your education and your career? Where did you start, and how did you end up where you currently are? And then we'll pick it up from there in the next question about what you do on your daily job.
Yeah, sure. So thinking about my education, I was always really interested in environmental and ecological issues. I think for a lot of us millennials, Fern Gully was a touch point that really hit home about saving the rainforest and protecting biodiversity. But so I went into undergrad at University of Dayton, where I was broadly trained in ecology. I took a lot of I think every ecology class we offered, plant diversity, ecological restoration, disease ecology. And I really cut my teeth into research with undergrad volunteering. I worked in my academic advisor's ecology lab where I did a lot of stream sampling and macro invertebrate uh, identification for a PhD student's research involving an invasive riparian species. Um, I did an National Science Foundation REU where I got to explore reproductive ecology of freshwater mussels, which is really unique and interesting. So really a broad ecological foundation for the majority of my undergrad training. And then I decided to go to grad school. I was still pretty unsure of what I wanted to do with my career. I just knew that I really wanted to be involved in the environmental sciences, in ecology, and pursue passions with scientific policy and science communication. So kind of like a overarching nebulous concept of what I wanted to do. For my graduate work, I dove into ecotoxicology, investigating how anti-inflammatory medications affect crayfish aggressive behavior and physiology. And I also investigated how flowing aquatic systems have different exposure paradigms than traditional toxicological assessments. So I got a lot of my uh,
Wait, can you demystify what you just said? Because I think I got it, but that's only because I have years of limnology experience. Do you mean
sure.
streams?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I do mean streams. I mean streams, rivers, and any moving water, how moving water will distribute um, chemicals differently in the water column than your standard toxicological assay, which is a kind of a solution in a tank, and you put an organism in there and wait to see half of that population die. So I wanted to test a more dynamic paradigm where I had a continuous input of fresh water as well as contaminant going towards my organism. So I could really assess exposure at the point of the organism and more fine scale distribution of chemicals. Um, so that's a lot of integrating physics and biology together, which I don't think a lot of ecologists do in their initial research. And then for my dissertation, I expanded that outward to look at that flowing exposure paradigm, but in its major components, so magnitude, duration, and frequency, and really tease apart how those components contribute to an overall picture of chemical exposure. And I measured crayfish respiratory rates and uh, predator avoidance behaviors. So I try to keep my research ecologically relevant and using environmental concentrations of these toxicants to give us a more um, comprehensive understanding of what chemical distribution and exposure looks like in more natural settings.
Okay.
Um, and during this time, I want to mention that this was not a very linear career path for me. I took time off from my undergrad to my master's and applied for jobs and like biologist state jobs, um, agency
Biologist
workers,
what jobs?
like agency state jobs,
Okay.
US or Ohio EPA, Fish and Wildlife, those sort of positions. But I really found that I needed the more experience, which is why I went to grad school.
Can I interrupt you and ask you, were they saying that you needed that more experience, or were you assuming that based on lack of response, or?
I think it's a combination of both, but the feedback you get from applying to those jobs is really important, where they tell you if you meet qualifications or not, but also really in-depth reading of those postings and understanding the years of experience or education they want.
Okay.
Um, Especially for government positions, they tend to be very clear about what they want and what format they want and the kind of words you want to use when applying for those jobs, which I can talk about later too. I'm happy.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked about that a little bit on this webinar before, that especially with U.S. government jobs, because they get so many applicants, there's an initial AI screening that usually happens, and you do need to make sure that you make it past that screening by putting the correct words in there and the correct formatting. But I want to harp just on this again, because this is a question that hasn't come up before. You said you got feedback. I don't think that there's ever been a job in my life that I've applied to where somebody has actually given me feedback. Do you have like a magic spell to cast or something? Like how did you get feedback even once?
I think it's just Midwest charm. I don't know what I did. No, to be clear, I didn't hear a lot of feedback. I just want to say that any feedback I got is valuable. So like that one rejection where they tell you you didn't meet the qualifications, or that one interview you get and you understand the feedback happening in real time as you
Okay,
interview and you bomb, right? So,
got it.
um, I think just like experience and also learning to become familiar with hiring processes is really important.
Got it. Okay, so you applied for a bunch of jobs, you got a little bit of feedback, you realized that you needed some more experience, and this was all before in the intern before undergraduate and graduate. Okay, so now we're at graduate, you've decided you needed that experience.
Yeah. And also my graduate experience, I found academic burnout. I think that's a realistic thing to touch on, is that I tried to go straight through from the master's to PhD, and in the middle of the first year, I said I think I need a break, and I stepped back and I took the experience of that master's degree and also started applying for jobs. Um, and this is where you hit a lot more rejection and you regroup and you uh, make decisions, and I made the decision to go back and finish my PhD. And along the way, I tried to also build a lot of soft skills that academia doesn't teach you through my my part-time work in restaurants, where I like managed restaurants. I bartended. I did all kinds of things to make ends meet, but it really taught me a lot about public-facing communications, which I think we don't always get as scientists. And I think it's a valuable skill to add to your toolkit if you want to explore careers in ecology.
Okay.
Um, because we're going to be asked to digest science for somebody. And I think it's a really important skill set to be able to do that. So yeah, graduate school happened, and then PhD I finished up. I was then selected for a fellowship with the government called the Canals Marine Policy Fellowship Program, and it is a 1 year immersive experience within an executive placement in NOAA, Fish and Wildlife, EPA, or another participating agency, or a legislative experience where you're on Capitol Hill working with Congress people, and you get to understand um, policy related to ocean, Great Lakes, and other coastal resources. And it's funded by the National Sea Grant Program. Really great program. I think oh, I don't want to say how many states. I want to say at least 20 states have a sea grant program. So any of your Great Lakes states, your coastal states, they have a program where you can get involved with that as a graduate student and dip your toes into government work if that's what you're interested in. I really expanded my skill set there because I took a social science position, which I'm not a social scientist, but I got to have some experience in not only learning regulations, government processes, but also the integration of social science data with physical science data and how that might shape decision making for uh, resources and ecosystem preservation is how
Yeah.
I incorporated that into my skills. A really great experience. And then I took a chance and applied very broadly, um, and ended up at Exponent in 2024. So it's kind of been a whirlwind journey.
When you were applying, were you also applying to government agencies, or had you
Yes.
decided you didn't want to do that?
I still wanted to be in government. I was aware that the administration was shifting in a different direction in terms of what their priorities with environmental issues are.
Can you
So
just
I,
tell me the year in which this was so we have some context for administration?
right, 2023.
Okay.
So ending of Biden and into Trump. But really, I just wanted to keep my options open. I didn't want to limit myself to a federal position. Um, and I applied to consulting positions like Exponent, contracting positions with the federal government, which are not the same as having a federal position and benefits, but it is another way to work for the federal government if you're interested.
Excellent.
Federal positions, uh, postdocs, all kinds of positions. And yeah, I took a chance on this and I am now consulting.
Nice. Just a reminder, I saw somebody's hand go up. If you do have a question, we absolutely welcome you to ask it. Just do so in the Q&A. Thanks, Sandra. Do so in the Q&A. Alex, I have a million questions for you on this, but I want to give Rich a chance to talk about his point A to point Z at this point. Rich, I'm sorry to date you here, um, but you're gonna have to fit your entire life, compress it into
Yeah.
like the 5 minute time span for us here. Can you think you can
There's
do
not
it?
enough letters in the alphabet, but I will try to give you the highlights. And what I'll come back to some of this in the number four question that you sent to me. But basically, my career has really been based on serendipity and opportunity. And I think my advice would be ready. The big thing is being ready for when things line up or for when opportunity arises to maybe take advantage of the situation. And so I started. I grew up in suburbia, northern New Jersey. My parents grew up in New York City, and uh, and so there wasn't a lot of nature around in suburbia, northern New Jersey. But we did have a forest patch right next to the house, and so when my mom let me out of the house, she knew where I was going to be. I was in the forest. I was looking at birds. We had stream. We used to stock a little pond with fish, all this kind of stuff. And I really got into it. And later on, my sister had married some guy from the Navy who lived in Montana, and they moved to Montana. And so we were thrown into the proverbial, station wagon back then. We didn't have minivans and all that stuff. And we drove out west. First time I was west of Pennsylvania. Same with my parents because they both grew up in New York. They hadn't been out there. And I absolutely fell in love with nature. And then that's what I was going to do. And I didn't know what that exactly meant. But I had a great guidance counselor in high school. She knew a guy. She had a friend who went to the College of Forestry in Syracuse and arranged for me to talk to him. And I was like, that's where I want to go. And so that's where I went for my undergraduate in forest biology. And I was lucky enough, and I'll talk more about this later perhaps, to get a work study position working in the soil lab, cleaning glassware for the grad students and the scientists that were working there. And that led to an opportunity, that word again, opportunity, for a research assistantship for me to stay on to work on my master's in science in forest soil science. And so that's what happened. And then I was fortunate enough to get a job with my master's of science working in New York City. I was in Central Park, set up a soil lab in Central Park. First one, of course. I don't think anybody ever thought of having a soil lab in Central Park before. And this is when the city was coming out of a really bad time financially, Ed Koch's early 80s. And then from there, I worked for this.
Wait, wait, wait. What was the purpose of having a soil lab in Central Park?
They were restoring Central Park.
Okay.
Basically, there was this massive, they raised money from all the wealthy people on Fifth Avenue and Central Park West, millions and millions of dollars. And so they were able to go out and hire people like me to and working very closely with landscape architects. And you go to the park now and it's just amazing.
It really
Yeah,
is.
it really is. But at that time, things were not looking very good. And so I then worked for the citywide project, doing what we call the natural resource inventory for New York City. And everybody was like, that sounds a little crazy. But as it turns out, in New York City, if you include, Staten Island, Queens, the Bronx, there was 25,000 acres of forest, real forest in New York City. And so we did a lot of work in mapping all the vegetation and all that kind of stuff. And I was fortunate enough, more opportunities, right, to meet some scientists that were out of the New York Botanical Garden who then talked me into going for my PhD. And everything lined up for that. And so
Why did they suggest that you go and get your PhD?
because we had a good working relationship. Working through the Parks Department, and we were developing management plans for these woodlands, these forests and wetlands, and actually we had grasslands as well. Um, and so we were soliciting advice from these experts in the region, and some of them, and so they thought we were doing some really cool stuff, and to make so the offer was made, and money became available to pay for it. So I was like, I'm going to do it.
Got it.
And that's how I got my PhD. And in the early 80s, urban ecology, urban soil science hardly was ever even discussed anywhere in the United States. And so we were kind of like the pioneers of doing that kind of research. And later on, after I got my PhD and I was doing a postdoc, that was funded by the U.S. Forest Service through the Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies. Some of you might have heard of that. Um, and prior in the old days, they were affiliated with the New York Botanical Garden. They're not anymore, but they used to be. And that's how I made that connection.
I see.
Um, and so NSF decided to fund a long-term ecological research site in two cities. They had money for two cities, and so we wrote the proposal for not New York, we wrote it for Baltimore, and that's a long story, but and we got that funded, and the Forest Service was like offered me a job right on the spot as soon as they learned that that money was going to come in. So I became a scientist in the U.S. Forest Service. So all these, serendipity, opportunity, and being ready. And I'll talk more later about how in some ways, I created some of those opportunities, and I could elucidate on that later. But
Yeah.
I'll stick to the 5 minutes right now.
No, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah, so it's a really interesting career path to get you to the USDA. And one thing that I kind of glommed onto is the idea of opportunity. A lot of people, when they go get their PhDs, they're thinking, okay, well, I just finished undergraduate, so I'm going to find a lab that interests me and go get a master's, and then maybe I'll go get a PhD. Or in ecology, it's often the case that you skip the master's and you go straight to the PhD. But in any case, a lot of people ask, well, how do you find labs? Um, I think too many people spend a long time dwelling on finding the right lab for them instead of meandering through opportunities and falling into the right lab. And I know it sounds like that's like, oh, well, if you're lucky enough, but it sounds like you were just looking for jobs and you found a job, and then that led you to a network that led you to the PhD. And I think that that
Yeah.
is a really important point to harp on. Alex, you said it too. You took time off between undergraduate and grad, and you looked for jobs, and you found out some things that you liked, some things that you didn't like, um, and uh, you kind of landed in the lab that was right for you, based on that meandering. So I think it's a good piece of advice to extract from that. Don't just look for the lab cold, right? If you're not sure what you want to do, don't feel that you have to go straight to graduate school. Find a job and let that guide you. And you have to be proactive about it. You have to ask for that network. You have
Yeah.
to inject yourself into meetings and everything. So, yeah, if you have any
So,
comments, Rich, go
no,
ahead.
no, that and very good advice. Two things about that. One is going for a master's degree before you go for a PhD allows you to do some shifting in your expertise. So when I finished my PhD in ecology, I had a master's of soil science as well. And so I merged the two doing my research from that point on.
Hmm.
Not a lot of people have a degree in soil science and ecology as well. So being able to do that, you can change a little bit of, it gives you an opportunity to broaden your perspective by having those two degrees. The other thing was taking some time off between the master's and the PhD. The 4 years I work in New York City parks, I call it my 4 year degree in life because yeah, I was so green when I went from my, master's into the real world. I didn't know how to handle pressure situations. I didn't know how to, it was hard for me to deal with different kinds of people, for example. And I've met all kinds of people working in New York City, from the very competitive, ambitious to people who are just great and wonderful to work with. And I'm still friends with those people to this day after all those years. So getting that real life experience, and Alexandra, she did hers in, working in the private sector is really important because a lot of academics, when you go just straight through your PhD and then you get your academic job, you haven't been in the real world because that's not the real world. Um, and and so it's made my research, when I did do my research, way more applicable. I was also able to communicate with managers and policymakers and so on and so forth, because I had that experience. And so a lot of academics have trouble in that arena. And don't get me wrong. I mean, we still need that. Obviously, we need academics who are hardcore doing their thing, but from a career perspective, getting that broadening experience is really, really important, I think.
Yeah.
And it's supervising people. I didn't never supervise the person until I worked for New York City Parks. And and when you know what they did, they sent me to training. I actually got training on supervision. And I was like, oh my God, I never thought about this. I never thought about that,
Yeah.
it was such a good experience for me.
That
And
is a really valuable skill set. And Rich, I
yeah,
think you and I have actually talked about that on stage at an
yeah,
Ecological Society meeting. So I
yeah,
absolutely getting like those more humanistic skills in your belt is really important if you're going to step
absolutely.
outside the walls, or even if you're going to stay inside the walls of academia, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Well, I call
Alex,
it EQ. I call it EQ. So you have IQ, right? And then EQ is emotional quotient, which sociologists have developed this idea that people are successful not because how, their knowledge, it's also how you deal with situations and deal with people.
yeah.
And that's the EQ.
I've heard that before. I still want to call them like these are just human skills, but
Yeah,
EQ
yeah, no,
works
you're
too.
right. You're right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Alex, I want to give you a chance to chime in. So, I mean, what you've just heard us say, that advice of sort of going out in the real world and figuring things out instead of jumping straight to academia, then going to academia, then going to academia. What are your thoughts on that, if any?
I mean, obviously I'm a huge proponent of that. I took that pathway of taking time to figure it out.
Mhm.
I was a barista, I was a bartender, I was a restaurant front of house manager. I did all kinds of things that are not being an ecologist, and I can't express enough how valuable all that real world experience is because it matters where you're at. I was in rural Northwest Ohio during all of my experience in restaurants, and talking to the general public looks very different there than New York City. And
A
understanding
little.
how to talk to your client base, you know, like
Yeah.
um, learning how to do that, learning how to manage people and direct a team, and even things like safety protocols that I did when I was working at a rock wall in undergrad. Like you learn how to manage people in that sense. You learn life-saving skills. You learn all kinds of things that academia could teach you in a semester-long course, but like it it's not the same if you can't go out and apply it. It's like
Yeah.
all those language classes you take and you learn a language, but you never speak it, you never converse in it. So, um, yeah, and what is it? Opportunity is when luck meets preparation. So,
Sounds
all
good.
Yep.
all those preparation steps you take in having real world experience will guide
Yeah.
you when that luck moment finally happens and opportunity presents itself.
Yeah. I love that thought. I think there's a lot of people, probably even in this audience, that are sitting around thinking, God, what use is this like stupid job I have working as a barista or something? And I think the reality is for ecology, it actually matters a heck of a lot more because not only do we have to understand population behavior, we also have to deal with populations. And
Yes.
so you cannot in the field that we work in, you cannot not interact with the outside world. Like it's just part of being an environmental scientist of any sort. I do know my share that just spend most of their time watching bees in the field and refuse to talk with people. But even then, understanding human behavior actually has really helped me teach animal behavior because I find that I understand it better, and I find that my students had understood it better when I could relate it to my experiences working at a bar or working at a coffee shop, which I have both done. So and also I do think that if you haven't done that before, I have said this so many times, it teaches you how much to hate it. Right. So that when you get into a real job, right? And I'm not saying that baristas are not a real job, it is a real job. When you get into the job that you want to do, right? And you have those days where you hate it,
hmm
you can say, at least I'm not a barista.
At least I'm not on my feet for 12 hours. At
Right,
least
right,
I'm,
right.
and if I
That's
am on my
right.
feet,
Right.
I'm field sampling. I'm interacting with stakeholders. I'm doing something more exciting than making a cappuccino.
Hey, some people that's really exciting. And for those of you that find it really exciting, thank you for making my cappuccino for me. Because I absolutely need that in the morning. I want to give Sandra, who is the ghost behind ESA webinars on the screen, I want to give Sandra a chance just to briefly talk about some ESA events for an intermission, and then we'll jump into some deeper questions about what you do at your job and some philosophies and the future. So, Sandra, take it away.
I am trying, but I think my computer froze.
Oh no, it is
Oh,
trying to.
yeah. Well,
That's okay if you would like to test it out and I can continue having a conversation or
yeah. I mean, I can just start talking and
that'll work
wait
too.
until the my computer I guess wakes up again. Yeah, but thank you, Aaron, Alex, and Rich. I'll try to be as brief as possible, but hopefully I'm sharing oh, I think we're back
There
on.
you go.
Hi. All right. So I'm Sandra Del Rio. I'm the professional development coordinator at ESA, and I just wanted to share some other things that we're doing at ESA that might be relevant and interesting for all of you. So thanks for joining us today. This is the last episode of the second season of this series, and you can access the recordings of past webinars at any time on the ESA webinars webpage. And if we schedule additional webinars, they will be posted on the website as well, this ESA webinars. And I will be sharing the links in the chat in just a moment. Then after a busy spring, there are no upcoming PD events scheduled at the moment as we're focusing on ESA's annual meeting, but we do have an online form at the bottom of our webpage, and you can suggest the types of professional development that you'd like to see from ESA. I'd like to mention ESA's Professional Ecologist Certification Program. For those who might not know, ESA has a certification program and it's been around for over 40 years. You do not have to be an ESA member to get certified. You can learn more on our website or email cert@esa.org. And yeah, annual meeting. We're on that time. Early bird registration ends June 18th. So if you haven't registered yet, you still have time until next week to take advantage of the lowest registration rates. The annual meeting program is continuing to take shape, and most of it is already available online. The schedule currently includes workshops, short courses, field trips, special sessions, and part of the Career Central lineup, with additional programming expected to be added soon, progressively. And Career Central will once again offer career panels, professional development sessions, networking opportunities, and other resources like reviewing resumes, CVs, all that good stuff, mock job interviews. So yeah, so all of those things to help ecologists through their careers. And before Career Central even begins, we're excited to offer something new this year, a wilderness first aid certification course on Saturday and Sunday. It's going to be led by Turn Left Adventures. Participants will learn essential field medicine and other outdoor safety skills. And yeah, and one important thing to note, you do not have to be registered for the ESA annual meeting to take this course. You can register for the Wilderness First Aid course on its own or add it into your annual meeting registration if you'll already be attending. And if you're not an ESA member, consider joining us. We have new sections and a chapter for those in the Rocky Mountain region. And for students, we now have 2 membership options, one for graduate students and one for undergrads. Undergrads for just 25, grads for just 40, and student members get all the same benefits and discounts as regular members, especially for career events like our professional development program and all those webinars, workshops, and courses that we host there. And other career resources available through ESA. We have our Career Center. It's powered by Wiley, and you can post resumes and search for job opportunities. There's also the Ecolog L listserv, and you can access ESA's online communities. You just need a basic web account, and jobs are posted there as well. And I'll share the links in just a moment, but thanks for your time. Back to you, Aaron.
Thanks. Rich, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here just real quick for ESA. These annual meetings that we have are really, really important. And when I think back in my career, going to the annual meetings of the science society that you're most closely associated with, for me, it's been ESA and the Soil Science Society of America. Um, it's really been very important for my career. And that's where you get to network. That's where you get to learn about your field, what's the latest. And let me just tell this story real quick because it was really important in my career. I went to my first big conference when I was working on my master's, and it was a new field at the time, urban forestry. And so they had a national meeting for the first time in Cincinnati. So I go to it with a friend and we give a poster on urban soils. And this little woman comes up and she starts asking me all these questions about the poster. And so, and this is before internet, things like that. So I said, hey, give me your card and I'll mail you. I got a whole bunch of stuff I could, send to you more about urban soils. So she hands me her card and she's the horticulturist for Central Park. So that's how I got the job. I then sent to her all the materials I promised, and I slipped in my resume with a nice letter. And she calls me up a week later and she goes, very smart of you to slip your resume in there because we're looking for somebody. So that's just one example. So going to ESA meetings presenting when you can, interacting, expand your network. It doesn't hurt.
I just want to add to that, though, to make sure that people don't think of that as just pure luck. I'm sure that you also sent your resume to many other people that you met at that meeting as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
It
yeah,
happened to be that that person emailed you back and offered a job, but
yeah,
it's not as if you just saw the one opportunity and grabbed it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it, we don't, we often hear about the one success out of the 99 other tries. And I think it's really important for us to be real on this webinar that
Yeah.
getting these jobs isn't just about luck. I applied to more than 100 different faculty positions before I got even a couple interviews, and you just have to keep on chugging. And it is
Right, but
difficult.
that personal interaction I had, she
Yes,
remembered, and if I didn't have that personal interaction, if I just sent my resume in without it, I would have been thrown in the pile with all the other ones potentially. So
absolutely.
that's why these meetings are really important. And
Absolutely. Alex, I don't know about you at Exponent, but the only way that I got this job at Exponent is because I went to CTAC, which is the
yeah,
Society for Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, and I met people, right? I networked,
Yeah.
and it still took me the better part of a year to even get an interview. But, that's how it happened, and you just have to network. I'll also throw in for ESA. We should stop talking about ESA and parading around it because we want to get back to the career talk. But I think this is important and relevant to the webinar. Myself and several others over the past 4 or 5 years have been working fairly diligently to bring a much larger voice to ESA. It has historically, for reasons that are, um, if you care to dive into ESA's history, it makes perfect sense. It's been largely academic for a very long time. And gradually, state agencies and federal agencies have come on in to be a major part of it, if not from the beginning, certainly in the past 40, 50 years, they've been a major part of it. Um, but the voice of businesses, an ecologist working in the professional private sector, or even NGOs sometimes, or even the small business enterprises, have been historically absent from many of the conversations. But now that so many people are getting jobs outside of academia, we've been working fairly diligently to bring more of those conversations in. We're having our first ever Ecology for Enterprise Solutions workshop where we're going to connect businesses with consultants in the field. We have many career sessions, career central sessions focused on how to develop your skills for working both inside academics as well as outside academics. And so I do encourage you that if you are thinking about jobs outside of academia, but you've historically been to an ESA meeting and have not found it to be of value, I suggest coming back. You might find it of more value now. Let's dive back into careers here. So we're running short on time, and I definitely want to make sure that we leave time for these two questions. If you can just tell me what your day to day looks like, and Rich, I do mean for you, both your day to day at the USDA as well as what you're doing now day to day. I think that's really important to understand what a job looks like in retrospect, as well as, as you're in the thick of it. Alex, if I could just start with you, your day to
Yeah.
day, you don't have to tell if you don't want to anything about any details of the business. I know sometimes that's proprietary or you want to keep it private, but just, do you get to go out in the field? Do you spend most of the day working behind a computer? What kind of stuff do you work on? What are the fun things? What are the less fun things?
Yeah, so my day to day is pretty varied. I will say it's mostly behind a computer. Um, but I have gotten to go in the field and sometimes this job takes you to fun places. My field sampling happened to be in St. Thomas in the Caribbean this past fall, which was really nice. Sometimes it's less exciting. But that was a highlight for me. Yeah, a lot of researching for preparing expert reports for litigation. Um, so a lot of reading. So I hope you like reading as a consultant because you need to be up to date on any little thing involving your project. So I get to do natural resource damage assessments. That aid and support on those is a lot of my job right now. Some of the less fun things are quality control for reports, so either editorial or technical support on those, and going and fact checking certain details in reports. And anything where I have to enter numbers in a spreadsheet is not fun for me, but that's part of it. So it's variable in the tasks that I do, which keeps it interesting. And the topic of our project varies
I
too.
see.
So it keeps it fresh, even though it might be
Yeah.
the same task every day.
I have found that consulting does offer you a wider breadth of topics to work on than academia does. Unless you are a particular go-getter in academia and just choose to involve yourself in everything, which in my experience leads to rapid burnout. But in consulting, you get the chance to really kind of be a small part of a lot of things and a large part of a few things, and it gets to be fun in that way. Rich, to you.
So early days, I I did a lot of field work, um, obviously for both degrees and also as a postdoc. In my early years as a scientist, I can't tell you how many soil cores and I collected and samples and things run in the lab. And so I was on top of the latest in laboratory procedures. I was sort of a leader in using multivariate statistics at the time, because remember, I go way back, in soil science in particular. So a lot of soil scientists, they were doing ANOVA and all that kind of, you know, univariate statistics, but the multivariate was something that we introduced and it caught on. But as time went on, I became more and more distant from doing that work and actually supervising people who were doing the work, and eventually became a bureaucrat. Worked in the national Washington office of the Forest Service. Um, but I was able to keep my fingers in research because I had good relationships with prior research teams, and so they kept me involved. I also maintained my science rigor by reviewing papers. So I was an associate editor for Urban Ecosystems for many years. And so I kept on top of the literature by doing that kind of work, even though I was much more of a bureaucrat. Um, and then when I retired, it's just been, utilizing my expertise, um, and and actually got into some field work in the last couple of years because we're going back to my old dissertation plots. We were able to get funding to do that, so I'm brought on as a consultant to do that. So eventually, now I wouldn't know the latest stats that are wouldn't be very up on all that right now, but in my early days, I was definitely um, keeping up with it with all that information and the latest and the greatest. So it's been a slow evolution, and that's basically, how it's worked out for me.
It's really great that you can keep your feet wet or dry in soil in the field even after retirement. And I think that this sort of leads me into the next question, which is um, uh, we often deal with challenges in our careers where we aren't where exactly we want to be, but we're constantly looking for the next step or helping others look for the next step. And I guess I'm curious, Alex, let's start with you here. So, you talked a little bit about doing stuff in between undergraduate and graduate. You talk a little bit about stuff in consulting. I guess looking back and now at your current job, are there times when you're like, I don't know if this is where I wanted to be, and what do you do with those thoughts day to day? Like, are you anticipating staying in this one position for the rest of your life, or are you hoping to diversify later on? And how did you deal with those types of issues earlier on as well?
Yeah, so I feel like I've been slowly circling in on what it is I want to do as a scientist, right? And I'm not sure that this is the destination of like consulting. But I also received really good career advice in my fellowship, which is to think of your career as more of a journey than a destination. and that it's constantly evolving with you as you grow and change and learn new things. So m my advice is be adaptable, be resilient in navigating these obstacles because it's temporary,
Yeah.
and really make the most of those experiences, and what, like, find the silver lining, whatever it is. Take that and make it the thing you're most proud of when you walk away from that experience, because you deserve to get out of a bad experience with some benefit, right? You
Yeah.
overcame that challenge, and it could be, I learned completely how to code in R by myself. Nobody taught me this. I developed this. I got certified, and that's the thing you take away from it, right? It can be um, very simple, but I think also um, being open to new experiences has been one of the things I'm most grateful for that I have done on this journey. Is when opportunity comes along, I'm ready and I'm excited about it.
I can certainly vouch for you on that because you and I have had meetings before where I just throw ideas up in the air and see what sticks. And you're always like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's see where it
Mhm.
goes, right? I do like that one piece of advice that you gave, which is you deserve to get something good out of a bad experience. I haven't heard that said before. I love that piece of advice. And so I think I'm going to repeat it again. I think that you deserve to get something good out of a bad experience. That's 100% true, and I think that people have difficulty in doing that because sometimes those bad experiences are really traumatic, in the worst case. And I've had my share of really bad experiences, and I have enough history now where I look back on them and I'm like, I am so grateful for that bad experience because I wouldn't have gotten where I am. But when you're in the thick of a bad experience, it's almost impossible to see that because you're trying to stay afloat.
Yeah.
And I don't know that any of us are going to have solid advice for what to do while you're in a bad experience. Um, I, I mean, do you? I,
I think I said this during a talk I gave once, and I was, because somebody asked me that same question of how do you keep going through those bad days? And I said, sometimes there's really not anything that's going to get me through that bad day. Sometimes a bad day is a bad day is a bad day, and it's going to suck. And it's kind of okay to live in that and
yeah.
experience it. And again, remember that it's temporary. And I, for my PhD, I said I can do anything for 4 years. I could totally get a degree. That's fine. So it's what you're willing to put yourself through. Also recognize your boundaries, your limits, and respect yourself in the process.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. Rich.
Yeah, so I think what one of my big career changes was going from a bench scientist in the Forest Service to the national office. And a lot of my science friends were like, "Well, there goes your scientific career, Rich," you know. And um, and it wasn't necessarily true.
Mm,
Um, and it also opened doors for me to work with other parts of the agency that I really didn't know very much about, and like the managers, so the people that actually manage the forest. So when I went to the national office as a scientist, I started working with the people that manage the forests, and I was just blown away at how amazing they were, and how they were able to take the latest in science and actually start using it in the field. And so that was really an amazing experience for me. The other thing was, and I mentioned, staying involved with science by, reviewing papers and things like that. But was the thing about being a scientist, and it's really important, I think, that you have something to show that you can, as a product, and it doesn't have to be a peer-reviewed journal article. It could be a report. It could be a successful, uh, work with a municipality on street trees or whatever. Have a product of some sort, so that you can show that around later on. You don't want to not have something to show. And of course, in the science world, peer-reviewed journal articles, that's one way of doing it. Book chapters. I use book chapters a lot to get my ideas down on paper and not necessarily, have a lot of data to back them up, but just kind of get those ideas out. And those kinds of things open doors up for me even after I went to the bureaucratic side of things. And so, for example, I wrote a book chapter on urban soils, and this guy from Finland, who's a long-term friend now, he asked me out to come to Finland to give a presentation at a workshop that they were having on urban soils, which opened up an opportunity to do a Fulbright. And then I did a Fulbright there. And so having, so having something to show, um, with all the work that you're doing on a particular project or something like that, think of things that you could actually come out with that you could show to people. That would be my advice.
I like that advice. In my mind, it's almost like you're sitting in a bad situation, perhaps, but you take the stake and you drive it into the mountainside on your own,
Yeah.
regardless of what other people say, because you want to get out of the situation, but you know that you need to get something out of this for your own benefit.
Right,
So whether
exactly.
they want you to do it or not, you're going to drive that
Yeah,
stake. You're going to publish that paper.
yeah,
Or you're just going to write up a blog article that you can point to later at the minimal, right? And you are
yep.
getting something out of that situation. You're not looking for somebody else to give you something.
Right. And that book chapter that opened up that door for me, I did when I was a bureaucrat, but I did that. I was not supposed to work on science when I was in my office job. I had other things I was supposed to do. So I would
Telling a
get there.
scientist not to work on science is like telling somebody not to eat.
I
That
know.
is,
So I used to get there early in the morning and put 2 hours in on science. And that's what I did every day. And that 2 hours was enough for me to get that book chapter done. And then somebody read it in Finland, and before you know it, I was off to bigger and better things.
nice.
Um, so yeah, so sometimes you make your own opportunities. The other thing is, and I think Alexandra brought this up, was that, a lot of times when things aren't going well, or you miss out on an opportunity that you really wanted. For me, in my experience, I don't know why, something better came along after that, that if I had gotten that earlier, opportunity, I would have missed out on the later opportunity that ended up being better. So don't get discouraged. That's the point.
Yeah.
Just keep on moving, and if you're doing good work, if you got good ideas, if you treat people well, they remember you. You never know,
Well, they also
So,
remember you if you don't treat them well, buddy.
well, but for the wrong reason. Um,
We have one question, and it's a good one. We kind of touched on it before, so I think I'm gonna answer it based on the conversation that I've heard so far. So the question is it better to target on one specific sector or broaden yourself out to multiple sectors? You know, Alex, you had said you applied widely to many jobs. Rich, you were kind of opportunistic and maybe also
yeah,
had applied widely to jobs. You certainly don't want to just throw resumes out there into the void without knowing what's in the resume. I see a lot of people just applying to everything, and that's not useful. If you are sending cover letters, if you're sending resumes out without editing them at all, you're not doing it right. You have to edit at least something in there to tailor it to the job, which means that you have to have some familiarity with the job. And I see from nodding that people agree with me. I think that uh, your challenge is to ride that line. You know, everybody has different levels of specificity. If you absolutely want to be an academic professor, don't apply for anything else than an academic professor. If that's what you know. But I would also say if you think that's what you know, you might also want to take a step back and consider what other options there are before you make that commitment to that academic. And I'm speaking from personal experience because I thought that I was going to be an academic professor. I did not apply for anything else. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't apply for any government jobs. I didn't apply for any nonprofits or business jobs. I wanted to be a professor. And in the end, that was probably a bad idea. I should have broadened myself out. I should have looked for other jobs. And when it came time for the burnout that eventually happened, I spent months trying to figure out what other jobs there even were on the market and building up that network virtually from scratch. And so I don't suggest narrowing down to answer the question. I also don't suggest throwing the resumes completely out there. You definitely want to find your target audience and direct your energy towards that. We are unfortunately out of time for me to ask your input. I want to thank you all for staying 1 minute over. I have put everybody's emails and LinkedIn profiles in the chat. People come onto this webinar to talk because they want to offer guidance to others that are looking in their career. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us.
Absolutely. Yep.
They will absolutely, at the minimum, message you back. If not, invite you for a Teams or a Zoom chat. This has been some great advice. Thank you all for joining. I hope to see people. Introduce yourself at Career Central during the ESA meeting. If you see any of us come, Alex is going to be there. I know Rich is going to be there. I'm going to be there. Like, so if you see anybody that you recognize from this webinar, please don't hesitate to come up and awkwardly introduce yourself. You cannot possibly be more awkward than what I've seen in the past. And if you are, I will give you an award. So please network, introduce yourself. ESA is a wonderful time, but if you have another conference that you want to go to, that's also extremely valuable. Thank you so much, Rich and Alex. And thank you so much for the ESA
Pleasure.
team, Sandra, and everyone else who has kept this going behind the scenes. Your assistance with this is incredibly valuable, and I know how much other stuff you guys have going on at the moment. So thank you all, and I look forward to the meeting. Bye.
ESA
Have a
all
good
the
one.
way.
Right. See y'all in
Take
Salt
care.
Lake.
Yep,
Bye.
bye.